Midsummer and Michaelmas, hence quarters. That's the quarter sessions. And they were made up of two or more, usually more, justices of the peace and the committee they had was presided over by a chairman who sat with a jury. And basically every court had a clerk of the peace who was appointed by the chairman and was charged with keeping the custody of its rolls and recording its records. And these people would meet and sort of essentially ran the county. When they did come to town, it was really generally a period of much feasting and drinking and celebrations. And when the court actually sat, it could be very riotous in there. And I think one of the best ones, if anybody's saw the last remake of Lorna Doone, there's a great period there where the sort of people are being brought for Judge Jeffreys, and you can just see the chaos that's going on around it. So they were quite riotous things. But the quarter sessions, as well as sort of listening to legal stuff and doing some crimes, they also had specific responsibilities. And so the bulk of these administrative functions were later transferred to the county councils. The quarter sessions survived for a little while for criminal cases, but then they did eventually sort of die out as their sort of functions were removed. So looking at the functions of powers, the quarter session, so it included administration of parish vestries, highways, so repairs of roads and bridges, administration of the county jails, supervision of public and private lunatic asylums and licensing, the county militia, the police, and managing the county finances by setting county rates, so the window tax, the land tax, this sort of thing. And so when the new county councils were formed, they actually took over most of these functions. So the county council didn't actually appear as a county council. It started as a provisional county council, and it first met 24th January 1889, and this is the first page from the first minute book of the council. It consisted of 62 councillors. There's only 52 today, and they had been elected. And the first item of business for them was the declaration of acceptance of office, so they would serve as county councillors and county aldermen. It was then followed by the election of a temporary chairman. And also then they asked the quarter sessions clerk of the peace to serve as the clerk to the council. Ultimately, this would be quite an important post, but initially the clerk of the peace. And then they went on to discuss various items of business. And the first item was councillors' expenses. So there's the trough. They've all got their nose in it already, you can argue. So the actual county council officially formed on the 1st of April 1889, along with all the other county councils as well. So I always think it must have been quite a chaotic time because, imagine nobody was quite sure what was going to happen or what was going to take place in the next few months. But like today, the council was responsible for deciding the authority's overall policies and setting the budget each year. To do this, it used committees. Initially, there were just 4 committees: the Highways Committee, the County Rate Committee, the Standing Joint Committee, and the Finance Committee. That was all there was in the initial sort of month or two, but quite quickly they did start forming other committees. And here's a sort of a various list of them. So Agricultural Committee, Education Committee, that had 9 subcommittees: County Planning, Public Assistance, Public Health, Fire Brigade, Committee for the Care of Mentally Defective, not what we'd call it today, the Law and Parliamentary Committee, Local Areas, Valuations, etc., yada, yada, it goes on forever. And some of these committees came in and out. So some appeared later, some were sort of lost and disbanded as time went by. But even today, this is how the sort of the county council operates. The main council delegates most of its work through committees. In addition to the committees, you had several permanent posts were created in the council, and I was actually trying to find photographs of some of these people. I couldn't actually find any at all. So this is why we've got a sort of a picture there of today's senior management structure in the council. But at the time, the council had clerk of the council, the clerk of the peace, the county surveyor, treasurer, the gas inspector, I'm not quite sure what he did as such, the analyst, county auditor, the custodian of the shire hall and judges' lodgings, the chief constable, coroners, magistrates, court clerks, police superintendents. So these were the initial permanent posts high up. They obviously then started hiring more people to actually work in the committees and work in the council. The council needed somewhere to meet and run its business, and the answer they decided was Shire Hall, which was actually built prior to the county councils in 1815, primarily as a new court complex for the quarter sessions of the assizes, when the assizes came to Gloucester. It was designed by Robert Smirke, who actually did the British Museum as well, and the frontage is this quite nice ionic portico. It's said to be inspired by a temple on the river Ilissus in Greece. Whether it is or not, I don't know. I've never been there. But in 1889, when the council formed, the provisional council thought, well, we need somewhere to go, so why not use the Shire Hall, which most of the time lay empty because the court was doing other things. So it was agreed it would become the new county hall, but no one changed the name. So that is why we have the name Shire Hall. Go into some of the other shires around the area and they tend to have county halls, whereas we've still got the Shire Hall. And the original building, you had a grand jury room, 2 courtrooms, had an office for the clerk of the peace, and a large public room, which was then used for concerts by the Three Choirs Festival. So all these were basically initially taken over and used by the council. In 1896, the front part of the building was altered internally to create a council chamber, and this is the view of the one that's there today. And this is where the elected councillors could meet, and at the same time, they also built new offices for the clerk of the council, the county treasurer, and the county surveyor. So for the first time, they had their own permanent little offices and kingdoms. It remained like this till about 1961, when the council had expanded to the point where it outgrown the existing building, and so there was a major rebuild that took place, and the whole front of the building except for the portico was demolished and remodeled. It was rebuilt with the addition of office blocks on the west and south sides, and also extended over to bare land to connect to another new block which also incorporated the county police headquarters. And the picture there, and you can see there, is sort of looking from the top of what would now be the police quarters, looking towards the building that was being built after the old Shire Hall had been demolished. I got another one here looking down from the top of one of the buildings, and I love this picture primarily because it's got that Woods Army Navy stores. I think anybody who's lived in Gloucester for a amount of time would have remembered that shop. It was the best shop in Gloucester. I spent so much of my pocket money in there on various things. But this is the site, now that's obviously completely modelled in by an office block. But again, gives you an idea of sort of, the money they had to spend to make the building suitable for the modern council. So we'll move on to the committees and the functions, and this is a selected batch of things. We don't want to be here all day. We could be quite easily. So what I've basically done is I went onto our catalogue and I just put the GCC in and just scrolled through and thought, oh, that looks interesting. That looks interesting. We'll have that. And we'll have a bit of that. So again, as with all my talks, it's quite eclectic, really. It started off being alphabetical order, but I sort of lost that as time went by. But having said that, we'll start with the Agricultural Committee, comprised of 51 members, and 17 of these were appointed by the Ministry of Agriculture. And the remit of it was actually quite broad. It covered animal diseases, destructive insects and pests, destruction of rats and mice, we come back to those later, fertilisers, feedstuffs, land drainage, smallholders allotment, milk and dairy, animal pharmacy, poisons, livestock and horse breeding. And to oversee these, as well as the main committee, they had several subcommittees were formed. So these included, the great ones: the Livestock and Horse Breeding Subcommittee, Diseases of Animals Subcommittee, Urban Pest Subcommittee, Rats and Mice Destruction Subcommittee, and there are several more. In the picture there, it just comes from the Livestock and Horse Breeding Subcommittee. And these would look at bringing in quite valuable horses into the county and setting them around the county for stud, so farmers could get better horses eventually. So these are quite important things, some of these committees. Much of its work was also responding to notices and orders from the Ministry of Agriculture, such as routine animal inspections. And this is a nice one. This is the second general inspection of dairy cows for the year 1929 to 30. Recorded 44,900 cows in the county. It analyses diseases they had, how many were at milk, how many were dry or in calf, sort of thing. So again, if you're interested in sort of this sort of thing, some of these records, which to be fair, they're not really looked at a lot, do contain a lot of useful information. It also covered things like sheep scab, transfers of infected animals, regulations about milk sales, regulations, reports and actions about swine fever in pigs, which was quite important at the time and is growing again at the moment. Sheep dipping veterinary inspectors' fees and reports, and also the oddities, such as the American Gooseberry Mildew Order of 1907. There's a few pages on that. It's quite an interesting one, although you think, why do we interested in that? How much technically do we grow a lot of gooseberries here or not? I don't know. Moving on, the Allotments Act Committee. This first met in August 1891, had less than 10 members. Again, this is the page of the first minute book. The main role of the committee wasn't sort of actually to provide allotments, but it was to investigate the urban or rural sanitary districts if they failed to provide small holdings and allotments. And if they did, they would hold inquiries into the reasons, and if required, they could force the sanitary district and their successors, who were the urban and rural district councils, to provide them. One of the most important things, they also ensured that the letting rates for small holdings allotments were set at no more than that for local farmland, which is one of the reasons why there are so many allotments today. Like, that's his mine down there. It's a bit scrubby at the moment. I'm taking it on for very long. But basically, if they let these at sort of town rates, they'd be prohibitively expensive. Set them at farming rates, and this is to encourage people in the cities and the towns to be out and grow their own food at a much cheaper way. One of the most important subcommittees on the Agriculture Committee, especially during the wartime, was the Rats, Rabbits and Weeds Destruction Subcommittee. I love this one. It had 4 main officers: a county pests officer, a county rats, rabbits and reeds, like Jonathan Rossi, isn't it? Rats, Rabbits and Reeds Destruction Officer, a county rabbit officer, and an assistant rabbit officer. It also hired gamekeepers as and when required to control rabbits and rats. Its main actually remit was to control anything considered vermin, so rats, rabbits, and a little later grey squirrels. And again, there's a vast amount of material on this, of not only the committee meetings, but of the places and things they went to and what they did. And one of the tasks of the assistant rabbit officer was to produce regular reports on farm inspections, serve infestation notices, and look at ongoing rabbit infestations around the county. And this is the page from there. And these, again, great reading through some of these. And some of them you can see where one farmer's having to go at another farming for not controlling his rabbits, then eating his crops. And again, there are pages of these reports. So again, interested in a farm around the country, it's always worth having a look at one of these. But the county employed a number of rabbit trappers, reasonable fair wage, £2, 10 shillings a week in 1941, about 150 quid today. And they were required to use snares, traps and ferrets rather than shooting rabbits. Now, I'm not sure whether that is because 1941 gunpowder was in short supply, or whether it was a sort of a statutory thing. I've not had a chance to have a look back at that. Typical bounty was threepence a rabbit, 80 rabbits for £1. That is, if my old money arithmetic is right. And the numbers killed a week were upwards of 100 to 250 around the county. So that's quite a lot. Now, I'm not sure how much a rabbit would have cost at the butchers at the time. So I suspect that a typical trapper might have actually flogged a rabbit to somebody else for a shilling or sixpence, rather than get the bounty for 3p. So whether these figures are accurate, again, it's a really interesting thought. I would imagine most of them would rather flog the rabbits to the neighbours and get more money, but we'll never know for sure. Mentioned tree rats, the grey squirrels. They're one of the UK's most unpopular non-native invaders, as well as threatening the existence of our native red squirrels because they carry a virus which the reds aren't accustomed to. The grey squirrels do a large amount of damage to crops and trees, not quite as much as deer do today, but close to it. An interesting attempt to reduce their numbers, the county organised grey squirrel shooting clubs, and to encourage people to join these, they actually issued free 410 and 12-bore shotgun cartridges to members, which I think would be great. The latter were considered more effective, particularly where trees are tall. So if you squirrel out in the tree, a 12-bore will still get it. Well, the 410, which is known as a garden gun, ladies' gun, children's gun, wouldn't quite have the same effect. So, and again, grey squirrels are still a bit of a pest today, to be honest. Move on to education. So the Education Committee was the second biggest spender in the County Council. In 1938, its expenditure was 650,000. Today, it's part of the Children and Families Directorate. It's 1.77.9 million. So it gives you an idea of how much things have come on. It had 60 members, 40 were elected councillors, and 20 were people representing other educational bodies, voluntary schools, and education specialists. So the idea was to give it a broad remit. So, even the councillors thought they were on a good thing. The professionals there could say, actually, no, you need to do this instead. So that's probably why they're there. And except for matters relating to closing schools, new school buildings, land purchase and appointment of members, the committee actually delegated all of its duties to 9 subcommittees. So you had an agricultural education subcommittee, a finance subcommittee, a higher education subcommittee, juvenile and employment subcommittee, the college domestic science subcommittee. I'm going to fed up of saying subcommittee soon. So elementary school management, county library, school attendance and building. So, it gives you an idea of how busy these people were. As a guide, in 1903, there are 52,870 children in the county at school, and they had an average attendance of 82.5%, which is probably not as high as they'd have liked. I did try and find the figure for today. I couldn't find it, so I apologise for that, but it's probably going to be on the council website somewhere, I would think. So one of the main committee's tasks was planning, funding or building new replacement schools or extensions to schools to increase capacity. And again, here we've got quite a nice little archive. So this is, for example, a proposed alterations to St Lawrence's County Primary School, which is simply needed because the old school building was too small. So you can see on this plan here, the dark outline at the bottom, sort of on that screen in the centre, that was the old school. The red was going to be the new school. So it sort of doubled a school in size. And as we're on about schools, this is the one of the new Kingsholm Council School, which is where we are at Heritage Hub today. So they would build new schools and they had to. Interestingly, on these schools, I think is the amount of space they tried to squeeze in. So, modern school would no way would go to this spot today. It's far too small, but back then they'd make use of what they had to. And again, we've got quite a nice series of these plans. So if you're interested in school in your local village, it's always worth having a look at these, because we might have a plan of the school which might be interesting to people. Move on to the library committee. So public libraries, as opposed to subscription libraries and village reading rooms, only really began to appear after the Public Libraries Act of 1850. But at the time, very few were created, primarily because the sort of the upper class and the great and the good thought that educating the lower classes was a bad thing, as they had so much time on their hands now. It only increased political awareness and increased social agitation. So it's the classic, keep them down and they won't rise up against us sort of thing. But despite this opposition, more and more libraries did begin to appear, primarily because the government knew that Britain was falling way behind in education provision compared to Europe, and they didn't like that idea of empire becoming second. So they generally started to promote the idea of education to all, and actually urged county councils to do more for it. And the Public Libraries Act of 1919, for the first time, enabled county councils to become library authorities. So the Education Committee quickly drew up the Rural Library Scheme, which established a central library based in Shire Hall in Gloucester, and from here books were distributed to towns and villages in the county. They didn't really think how they were going to get them or where they were going to go to at the time, but that did pop up later. So over time, the council acquired other pre-existing libraries. So, for example, Stroud Public Library was acquired in 1930, but it also built new libraries. And again, here we've got quite a good amount of material. So this is a contract with Spackman & Sons for a new county library and offices. It was built on the corner of Berkeley Street and Longsmith Street in Gloucester in 1936. The map here shows where it is. So it's right on the corner of Longsmith. It doesn't exist anymore because it was demolished for the telephone exchange. And so it's at this time that the library moved to a new home in Brunswick Road, where it has remained ever since. Although I said that, the actual local studies library, which went there, that's now here at the archive. So we've got all that stuff, which is great. Looking at the finance committee, so you've got the great thing, the Beatles and the Flying Lizards. Remember those? The best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and me's I want money. So this arguably could be the finance of the GCC finance committee, but I'd say it's got to be in a good way, really. It was considered probably the most important committee in the council, only consisted of 22 members, and its main duties was to raise rates, collect revenues, borrow money, levy preceipts, and to advise elected members or other committees on financial aspects of proposals that they wanted to undertake. So it was a bit of a safeguarding committee in a way. And this has got an interesting bit. So the first return of expenditure for the year 1888-90, 134,049 pence, 49 pounds. Not very much money really. Today, 609.6 million is going to be the figure set for next financial year. So it's come on a little bit. And this little table comes to a little book here we have on sort of the centenary, I think it was, of the county council. councils. I think even the 50th anniversary of the county councils. And it's got quite a nice sort of summary. But again, lots of figures in these books. So inextricably linked to the Finance Committee was the County Valuation Committee, and this committee assessed properties to determine what rateable values that they should be given. And as well as homes, industrial settings, commercial properties, they looked at woodlands, market gardens, schools, fisheries, farms, railways, voluntary hospitals, village halls and parish rooms, sewers and sewage disposal works, electric cables and substations, playing fields, coal mines, police stations, docks and canals, etc., etc., etc. Basically, anything that they could think they could raise money from, they looked at and gave it a rateable value. Then this was passed on to the Old County Rate Committee. So this is the committee that actually set the rates required to run the county. It comprised 20 members. And again, this is the first page of their minutes there. It used rateable values provided by the County Valuation Committee and decisions by the Finance Committee to set a pence in the pound figure to calculate the rates that should be collected overall. The first rate passed, 1889, was 10 pence in the pound. And this is basically set a pattern whereby it passed on this amount request to boroughs, urban and rural district councils, who could then add their own requirement onto it, but they also had the responsibility of collecting it all in. This committee also made assessments for businesses, revised or altered the general rate, and considered objections to it. And again, a lot of these books are actually quite dull reading, but they do contain a lot of really useful information. Again, not just on the main rating figures, but you can find little snippets in there about, why certain roads, for example, were taxed, or, if they private roads or private. So again, they're quite complicated things, but quite a lot of information there. In his 1716 book, The Cobbler of Preston, I've got to get this in, Benjamin Bullock wrote, "'Tis impossible to be sure of anything but death and taxes," which is later nicked by Benjamin Franklin and loads of other people. And no one escaped rates, not even the Crown. And this is entry from the minutes of the County Valuation Committee, 20th October 1929, and records the conclusion of a lengthy and somewhat ill-tempered settlement made with a rather recalcitrant Forestry Commission regarding the rateable value of Crown woodlands. Eventually, they haggled them down to 2 shillings 6 an acre, about £5.72 today. And this is, I imagine this sort of thing still goes on basically between the Forestry Commission and the councils. But the fact at the time it was closer to the Crown than it is today, I think might have been quite entertaining. So highways had 55 members. It was the largest spender of the county council for many years, and even in 1889 its initial expenditure was £48,000, 30% of the council's budget, and the rest was other piecemeal. So it was a massive expenditure. It typically met with the General Purposes Committee, probably because so much of its business impinged on other council committees. That's why I think that's the only reason I can make sense of that. In 1889 there were about 900 miles of main roads in the county, and at the time these were administered by 66 authorities, 23 of whom were local highways boards. And again, we've got their records here in various guises. The largest district had 63 miles, and the smallest was just a quarter of a mile. I've yet to find out where that one is. I was desperately trying to find out where that was, and I haven't found it yet. So, again, watch this space. I might be able to find it for the Saturday coming, maybe. So when the council formed, it took over control of roads, bridges, culverts, some private streets, not all, roadside ribbon development where people were building on the side of roads, pavements, footpaths, telephone poles, adverts, regulations, and petrol station bylaws. So again, a massive committee with a big remit. It also ran the Thames and Severn Canal, because at this time the council had bought it and was running it as a sort of not just about a going concern, I think. So again, not often you get a council with fingers in the water, so to speak. So most of the business of the Highways Committee was dealing with encroachments on roads where the highway was infringed upon by ditches, fences, driveways, buildings or vegetation. These could be accidental, deliberate or requested encroachments. So the minute books are full of decisions regarding them at places all around the county. And again, they make really interesting reading if you've got a specific place in mind. It's always worth checking these volumes. Most of them are indexed. So, if you're looking at various parishes, you'll find something there with a bit of luck. So typically the process involved referring to the encroachment to the county surveyor, who would then investigate it, but would send men out to investigate it. He would then report back to the committee, who would then follow his recommendations and either approve or reject the encroachment. So again, rather much like they did today, there would be an order served, so you can keep it or you've got to remove it, etc., etc. One of the most interesting things they did quite late in the 1980s to 1990, the Highways Committee was tasked with creating registers of all the county's road and rail bridges with technical data, details of repairs needed and those carried out, drawings and photographs. And this is a typical entry. This is Bridge 401 in the county. It's Washpool Bridge near Welford. It's a county-owned bridge. And you can just see, so they literally went out, took photos of it, took drawings of it, marked it on a map. And these are quite wonderful things, invaluable for bridges if you're interested in bridges. If you're not, they have no interest whatsoever. But to me, I quite like these. There are lots of them. They cover virtually every bridge you can think of. So as well as the county-owned bridges, they covered private bridges. So this is bridge number 566. It's at the Bathurst Arms at North Cerney. I'm sure we all know the Bathurst Arms, lovely place for a pint on a summer's evening. But what I like about this one is they've sort of taken pictures, they've done the map and they've ringed the bridge. Then somebody's put it in pencil, you can see it at the bottom there. This is the wrong bridge. This is the technical bridge. And it's basically because there are two bridges either end of the pub. The one bridge is owned by the county, which shoots up to sort of Cobbley Way. And the other one is the one that basically goes into the pub itself. So it's not a county-owned bridge. So they do get errors with some of these, and they do crop up. But again, these are really interesting little registers. These are a great little archive we have. Snow, well, like today, technically the Highways Committee was responsible for road clearing after snow. And I found this entry in one of their minute books for February 1895, when the county surveyor was proposed two options, and he gave this committee to think about. What should we do, basically, with snow? So there are two options. So snow clearing option number one. After heavy snowfall, the county surveyor was told he would engage sufficient numbers of men, horses and carts and clear the surface of the road. And to do this, the committee said, OK, we'll provide you with £6,000 to be available to cover this expense. So that was the first option. And the county surveyor also made another option, snow digging number two. Here, only drifts that blocked roads would be cleared to give a passageway 7 feet wide, employing what extra men are required, and when this is done, discharging them and to widen the road and track and clear the snow off the road. No extra money was required for this. I think we can all guess which one the county council decided. Okay, option two. And again, this is why our roads aren't cleared after heavy snowfall. They haven't taken the Cornish approach where they get every farmer with a bucket to clear a road, but they do that in some of the Cotswolds. But this is where it comes from, I think. On occasion, the Highways Committee also discussed accidents at work, and I came across this one in September 1894 when Charles Smith, he's a piecework road worker employed by the county council working in a quarry, when a landslip buried him and it gave him such severe injuries it took him 8 weeks to recover. He was very worried he'd lose his job, so he wrote to the council while he was recuperating, asking if they would make an allowance for his time off. And you think, gosh, this is where our labour rights and laws are. Luckily for him, the county surveyor noted that he was generally good conduct, he was a good worker, and then due to the special circumstance of the case, the committee agreed and gave him £4 as a gratuity. It didn't actually say whether they employed him back afterwards, but £4 in 1894 was a reasonable sum of money, so it's a little bit of compensation for his accident. Again, health and safety at work, where are we today? Looking at the Road Safety Committee, formed in 1946, so quite late. 3 members of each of the following committees. They had Highways, Education and the Standing Joint Committee. Routine business included business related to national discussions, circulars and acts, road accident statistics, expenditure, road safety organised reports and minutes of local road safety committees. So subcommittees were formed for the major districts. It also received annual road statistics from the police. So this is the one for April 1945 to March 1946. 293 road accidents on this one. You can see there the most one is the vehicles colliding with pedestrians crossing the roadway. So 45 instances of cars hitting people crossing the roads. But I do like it right down at the bottom. Cyclists colliding with open a door of vehicle. So this is where they've opened the door and the cyclist has hit the door as he's coming by. So, and again, we've got lots of these reports going back from 1946. They were done once a year up until quite recently, and they do make quite interesting reading. The Road Safety Committee had 7 local subcommittees, so for the various county districts, so Cirencester and Tetbury, Forest of Dean, Cheltenham Rural District, which later became Cheltenham Rural, Tewkesbury and Charlton Kings District, Gloucester and Newent District, North Cotswold District, Stroud and Dursley, and Thornbury, Sodley and Warmley. So, imagine we've got this information on all these places around the whole counties. Again, it's a little minefield of information here for people. The Fire Brigade Committee only actually started in 1947, and it made, the reason for this was that this act came in that made county councils the only official fire authorities, and so the Fire Brigade Committee was formed to assume overall control of firefighting in the county. It superseded the Fire Brigades Act of 1938, which had made boroughs and district councils the fire authorities, though most of these already had their own fire brigades anyway. So this is the sort of thing the counts had taken over. So this is the Minchinhampton fire engine around 1900. The town, interestingly, actually had its first fire engine in 1755, though its first official fire brigade wasn't formed until 1864. So like 100 years later, it formed the official one. But it's rather a nice photo of that one. And then we've got this lovely picture of the Stroud Urban District Councils, the Merryweather Fire Appliance. This is in the process of pumping water from the Ellsworth Brook to fight a big fire at Workman's Sawmills in 1911. It's quite a famous fire. So basically, these different brigades came under county council control at the time. Looking at local taxation, the licenses committee, very onerous duty of grabbing money. Basically, it was transferred to the council from government collecting in Finance Act 1908. It's gone back since. But the resulting committee had 18 members whose powers included imposing, mitigating and remitting penalties in the instigation of legal proceedings against defaulters or evaders. One bonus for us poor, hard-pushed local taxpayers was that the cost of this department was met by central government, which probably isn't the case today. In 1908, the number of established licenses issued were 38,000, and it included licenses for 17,728 dogs, 4,360 male servants. What happened to the female servants? And 1,125 are moral bearing. So if you were a lord of your own thing, you had to pay money. Good for that, I reckon. And again, a massive committee, lots of information in these, and there's some quite good little snippets in it. However, in 1903 along came the Motor Car Act. So we move on to vehicle licensing. So in 1908, the council issued 134 motor vehicle licenses, which brought in £556 7 shillings, about £44,000 today. And among them was this lovely picture. I love this. This is Dr. John Foster of Churchdown. Dr. Foster went to Gloucester from Churchdown, yeah? This is George Richard Lepony Automobile Voiturette. It's a great vehicle. So that would have been in that first tranche. 1922, more vehicles had to be licensed thanks to the Road Act of 1921, and it comprised 11,000, just over 11,000 motor vehicle licenses, nearly 5,000 horse-drawn vehicles had to be licensed, and issued 11,000 driving licenses. Interestingly, I like the fact that the number of driving licenses almost equals the number of car licenses. So, with the exception of maybe 20 people having a car and more than a car having more than 2 people could drive it, I think it's very interesting. This brought in 95,948 pounds 9 shillings. 1938, the figures increased a lot. 76,000 motor vehicles, only 127 horse-drawn vehicles at this stage. 45,000 driving licenses, and the revenue here was £312,003, 4 shillings and 11 pence, about 12.3 million. And interesting because 1938 was when my dad got his first car, and at the time granddad said to him, you don't want to get a car, just get a horse, it's much easier, cars won't last at all. And this is despite the fact that my granddad was one of the first motor engineers in the county. So it shows you how much faith he had in them. But where we are today. So I love this one. This is the register. So all these vehicles had to be registered. And this is the first vehicle register for the county. Runs from December 1903 to May 1908. It's the first page. It's AD1 to AD7 index plates. The actual book goes through up to AD 1132. And for every one of these entries, there's the name and the address of the owner, description of the vehicle, its type, colour of body, its weight, its intended use, and its date of registration. This is quite a complex subject, but car registrations were issued. They had the straight series, then they went into reverse series. Eventually in 1973 it was taken away and passed on to the DVLA or the equivalent, and we ended at the number index plate SDG 410N. Now I haven't had a clue how many cars that entails. It's a lot. In many cases, registrations were reused. And if you're interested in finding out how many registrations there are, exactly how many vehicles, please come in and look through GCC/com/3/1/1. That's going to be your starting point. And there's about 150, maybe 200 registers to trawl through. However, I thought I'd bring this one out. This is the first car registered in the county, the AD1 plate, owned by the fantastically named Horatio Pillsbury Fernald of Clarence House, the Promenade in Cheltenham. It was listed as an Oldsmobile 5-horsepower petrol car that had an Oldsmobile body with black lime, bronze, and wine coloration. I've done a bit of research. It's one of these. This is very similar, an Oldsmobile curved dash 5-horsepower runaround. And I love the fact, if you look at the steering wheel, it's the classic old steering bar there, so brilliant. And this actually comes from Bonham's auction sites. It was a car that took part in one of the most recent Brighton runs. So amazingly, there are still a couple of these on the road. Amazing. Weights, Measures, Food and Drugs Committee. Legal adaptations of weights and measures began in 1707. British imperial units were first introduced into law in the Weights and Measures Act of 1824. The metric system was officially enshrined into UK law in the Weights and Measures and Metric System Act 1897. So none of this 1973 joining the EU. We had metric enshrined as a legal measuring system from 1897, which is, I think, I didn't know that, quite incredible. The routine business of this committee included hearing reports of the Chief Inspector of Weights and Measures, reports of County Analysts for Food and Drugs Act, and various other things. It also examined and tested weighing and measuring apparatus in the county. They would weigh anything from pharmaceuticals to lorries. It had fixed methods of checking food, livestock, animal feed, coal, sand, ballast. It examined notes of prosecutions and dealt with any legal proceedings, as well as issuing legal summonses. It also had the chief inspector and inspectors of weights and measures who were tasked with going out into the community to check standards and also to prosecute offenders. The task of the inspectors was to make scheduled, fine, and unannounced visits to retailers to check the premises and check the weights and measures they were using were legal. And this is a typical page from one of the weights and measures conviction books we have. We've got quite a few of these. And this one happens to be from the sort of forest area, but there's ones from all over the place. And typically what the problem is unjust measuring unit or unjust devices, and it records the fines they were given, which in most cases, couple of pounds, something like this. The typical reason was a short weight. So basically, you actually had a weight, said a pound, but actually weighed 1 pound 3 ounces. Actually weighed 18 ounces. That's underneath, isn't it? So it'd be a much lower weight. So you think you got a pound, and actually you got under a pound. So that's the general one anyway. There are interesting ones there, for example, of coal lorries without scales on them, so they couldn't weigh the sacks of coal properly. And there are things like with bread weights and bread quality kicking through there as well. But again, these are quite interesting places. One of the tasks of this committee was maintaining a register of service stations, and the main role was to check that they were following regulations and that the fuel pumps were dispersing correct amounts of fuel, something we all take for granted. And this is a page from the Creighton Standard Service Register at 1981-1987. It shows checks on 5 and 1 gallon amounts from the pumps at Oxtal Service Station and Moons Garage, which of course Moons Garage is now part of the Heritage Hub here. It's where our Moons building. And again, a quick look at these. These have gill bar Arco pumps, which are still used quite today. And luckily for both Oxdals and Moons, they passed all the measurements. But I know in some of these you see big X's, and where you'd actually ordered a gallon and you didn't get a gallon and you got 3/4 or something. So again, really mundane, jobs worth council, but quite important for everybody. So inspectors in the department had to be certified, and this is the certificate of qualification as an inspector of weights and measures for James Bolton Biggs. He passed examination in weights and measures in July 1891 at the Board of Trade in Westminster, so he had to go up to London to pass this exam. Should be studied for it as well. And though he is employed with the county council, he appears to have been based in St George's Parish in Bristol. He probably did Bristol up to Berkeley or something like that. As well as weights and measures, the county employed lots of other inspectors. We've seen like some of the farm ones, but I like this one. This is Mr. James Wood, the county council's road roller inspector, and he's a Lloyd Motor Engineering LMC motorbike in the county's Gloucester Barrack Square depot circa 1914. A lovely bike that is, isn't it? So the council maintained motorcycles so its inspectors could quickly visit sites where road rollers are working, especially if there's accidents that occurred. And this is one where a road roller had broken into an old one on Priory Street in Cheltenham. And you can see where the wheels hit it and it's collapsed down into it. Luckily, the well wasn't that big, or the whole thing might have fallen in. This is December 1922. We know it was covered quite quickly, and the well was capped. But it makes you wonder, how many streets have these old wells, especially their communal wells, that are now just covered over. We've got one on site here at the archives up by the end of the garden, and we're quite not exactly sure where it is, to be honest, but it's there somewhere. So don't jump up and down in the garden is the answer for that. So the National Health Service Act of 1946 gave county and borough councils a statutory responsibility to provide an emergency ambulance service. So many actually opted to contract with a voluntary service such as the British Red Cross or St John's to do this, which was fine, but the councils did have to build ambulance stations. And this is the one down at Yate in South Gloucestershire, built in 1966. There would have been an early one before this. And again, we've got quite a few plans of this sort of thing. And I think this building's still there today. It's next to the fire station. It's part of the fire station now, but it's still down there at Yate. World War I, 2nd February 1916, an air raid alert was sounded throughout the country when Zeppelins had bombed Birmingham and then was seen to be heading south. And this is one of the letters that was sent to the King of Siam by, I can't remember the guy's name in Gloucestershire, one of the local bigwigs. And he wrote all about it, saying they'd seen the Zeppelins, they'd come south, we've warned them, we've set up an air raid system to let people know. In the event, they did actually turn east and headed away, but they got to the northern part of the county of Bournemouth, but it sort of heralded the potential for a bombing in Gloucestershire, and the sort of city of Gloucester, the county council reacted to this by issuing notices telling people how they would react. You'd have 5 or more blasts on this one of 15 seconds for various electricity works. They would lower gas pressure, etc. I know in Cheltenham they actually said that in the event of raids, people should go and hide under the railway bridges where they would lay straw out for them to sort of lie while raids were going on. In the event, there wasn't actually any other raid, so we were quite lucky. But it sort of raised an issue. So the council's ARP arrangements, the air raid precautions, began in November 1936, really at the urging of government, because they knew war was coming with Germany. So they established the Air Raid Precautions Organisation Committee in September 1939. It changed its name to the Air Raid Precautions Emergency Committee. You do wonder why they keep changing the names when version does the same thing, but there you go, that's councils for you. He had 12 members of the county council, all from the Standing Joint Committee, and 6 from the city council that joined in with them. His first meeting was 23rd of April 1937, so quite early. So he had a county organiser, a deputy organiser, 4 divisional officers for Gloucester, Cheltenham, Strand and Bristol were all appointed, and it was up to these guys to oversee all matters relating to air raid precautions, civil defence. This included from strategic planning, organisation to recruitment administration. It met weekly, largely dealt with the same or similar issues. To be honest, the minutes aren't that interesting. You thought they'd be a little bit more exciting, but they are dull side, to be honest. But it was responsible for provision of public air raid shelters, such as these trenches in Mangotsfield. They recited all shelters typically sited on wasteland, in parks, or in the middle of wide public roads or squares. So Stroud had a one in the square in front of the sub rooms there, and they were basically strong enough to provide direction from blasts of surrounding bombs around them, because more people died from bomb blasts than from direct hits. These trench shelters were zigzag, so if the bomb did score a direct hit, the shrapnel would only cover a small area and the blast effects would be mitigated. The blast didn't travel around corners, so it'd be directed up and stop, sort of thing. Another thing is they were far, far less common than private air raid shelters, though they're only intended to sort of let people who happen to be out on the street get shelter. And I was sort of looking at this one a little bit earlier on, just checking it was working right, and I noticed that on the left-hand side here, the map of the slit trench there, if you look at the building to the right, it's the council headquarters. So they've made themselves a shelter quite close to where they were working. But again, we have quite a few of these from various places around the county. So the air raid precautions are posted all over the county, as we know, and they work closely with all the sort of local councils. I just put a couple of extracts here from Post 6F in Kingsholm. It records 14th to 15th century bombs dropping on the 16th of January 1941 in Kingsholm area, and also the Sandhurst Road area in 12th of October, which was the raid on the GAC factory. So again, there's lots of these reports. Again, they tend to be focused on who turned up for duty as opposed to what happened. Some of them are quite confused, but they do make quite interesting reading. Sadly, they don't exist for a lot of other places, which is a shame, because it'd be nice to see exactly where bombs dropped in the county, and we still don't know 100% about that. So you had the County Defence Invasion Committee. So after the fall of France, councils had to form these committees, tasked with planning for invasion, also for establishing local defence committees, which are usually made of groups of parishes. Each parish had to draw up an invasion war book about what would happen when the invasion took place. Mostly these were concerned essentially with pushing evacuees through. We don't want them here. Looking after everybody in this place, looking after number one, push people through. They also had to prepare for treatment of casualties and medical resources in the event of engagement, which again, quite important. They also dealt with requests and progress reports from the various defence committees, the rest centres, who also acted as receiving stations, functions of food executives, voluntary food organisations, mobilisation of labour expenses, again, for the defence committees, and reports on any exercises. And again, lots and lots of material on this. Again, a lot of it is fairly turgid reading, and it's classic Dad's Army sort of, dotting I's and crossing T's. This is an example. This is just a little memo that was sent about, when you actually warned people or sent information through to the Gloucester City, perhaps you should send it to them separately, as well as sort of copying them in, because they're an organisation in their own right and they might be offended, basically. You think, get a grip, it doesn't really matter, they've been warned, that's enough. We get lots of this sort of material in these Invasion Committee books, and they are quite interesting reading. Moving on, the Civil Defence Committee. So I got this here: Struggle for Survival of the Grimmest Kind, the 1955 Defence White Paper. Post World War II, the threat of nuclear war grew with the Cold War, and the government encouraged the continuation of the ARP committees, but they should be renamed County Civil Defence Committee. And Gloucestershire played suit and had one. It was tasked with planning for the event of a nuclear attack, working with the new Civil Defence Corps, which had been set up largely to work with the Royal Observer Corps. Again, it's a big organisation. For a time, they did plan public air raid shelters and attack shelters, but they was quickly realised that they would be pointless. So the focus returned to post-attack roles and how do we sort of continue government in this country. In 1968, however, the CDC was disbanded, and all responsibility for coordinating nuclear attack planning fell to local authorities, so fell to the councils. And this is where I'm sure you remember these leaflets. I certainly do remember them. I even remember doing a nuclear drill at school once, which was pointless basically. But our school was about 2.5 miles from GCHQ, so it would have been a big vapor crater basically. But we did one. The county council did take part in lots of exercises. So this is a little bit exercise Loxley Hall, and whoever organised this exercise obviously had quite a good taste of poetry, because he actually put this quote from Tennyson in it: "Comes a vapour from the margin, blackening over heath and holt, cramming all the blast before it, in its breast a thunderbolt." Sounds like a nuclear blast to me, even though Tennyson didn't know about them. So in March 1959, the council took part in Exercise Locksley Hall, which was a large regional exercise designed to simulate the response to a nuclear attack on southwest England. And this is a page from the report, which goes on to about 5 or 6 pages in quite good detail, to be honest. It involved all the main authorities in the southwest, plus Civil Defence Corps, the police, the emergency services, as well as military bodies, utility companies, and transport services. So a lot of people took part in this. It was largely intended to be a practice for controllers, their staffs, and advisors about how they should mobilise and take control of the area in response to the aftermath of attack elsewhere, which for the purposes of this exercise was South Wales. And they had massive zones of contamination coming across the sort of from South Wales into Bristol, Berkeley and Gloucester, etc. These were called the Z zones. At the end of the report, in a massive understatement, the compiler reported that the whole matter of civil defence communications, message distribution priorities wants looking at afresh. And then he said, we need more teleprinters. We're not thinking that the teleprinters probably wouldn't be working because of the sort of electromagnetic pulse that would have gone out. But anyway, so that's Locksley Hall. Again, it makes quite good reading. There's not much sort of on the main internet about Locksley Hall, but there is on this next one, Exercise Grassseed in 1966. County Council didn't take as massive a role in this, but it still took some role. And the basic scenario was that at 9 a.m. on 8th of March 1966, a Russian Tu-95 Bear bomber dropped an RDS-37 3-megaton nuclear bomb, which detonated with 2.9 million tons of explosive 5,000 feet above the Church of St Mary's in Almondsbury. So that's the scenario that this exercise dealt with. It simulated a nuclear attack on Bristol, undertaken by planners to try and understand the problems of survival, and post-government after a major nuclear attack. Basically, they decided at Almondsbury, instantly vaporised, while in Bristol, people were blinded by the flash and struck by waves of heat and blast, killed over 100,000 instantly, probably with 200,000 casualties. At the time, Bristol had a population of 400,000. The exercise concluded the result, the attack would be utter devastation and survivors would face siege conditions with food riots, panicked refugees, E. coli and other plagues, horrifically high radiation and rotting corpses. It noted it would be very different to World War II. In World War II, people were so used, so when Bristol got bombed in the Blitz, it called on help from Taunton, Swindon, Gloucester, Cardiff. People, fire brigades came in to help. They suddenly realised while doing this that those places wouldn't be around anymore because they'd faced their own blast effects, their own attack problems. So this was something that amazingly, the government hadn't figured out. They thought you could still call on help from next door neighbours, and this is one of the reports that went back to the government about this and how pointless this was. Trying to call on, you've got to get your plans in place now because it's not going to happen afterwards. And this basically did ultimately come down to, I don't know if anybody remembers the frankly quite horrific BBC series Threads back in the 80s, which was a very good film, but post-attack. And it basically, this report basically said, it's going to be exactly the same as if you watch Threads. It's going to be complete devastation, a Mad Max scenario sort of thing. Anyway, let's start with the district councils and the parish councils. Just kidding. We're not going to do them. 27,000 items with district councils in our search field, the catalogue, over 10,000 in the parish council. That's a whole lifetime with a presentation, let alone an hour. And, if you think some of the county council stuff was dull, have a look at the rural district and urban districts, because some of that is really dull, have to be said. Sorry, guys, but it is. So we do this. The whole thing was really supposed to be about all councils, because these started at the same time as the county council, but time precludes those. So if you're interested in those, we do have good introductions on our actually online catalogue. So come and have a look at those. But I'll finish with a few little sort of highlights of some of the council things. So council job worths, we often get accused of being job worths. Surely we're not, are we? Well, possibly some of us are. This is a note from the county surveyor to the clerk of the council regarding the partial demolition of a rotten wooden shed on the council steamroller yard on Barrack Square. Okay, so this is county council property. Somebody demolished a shed that basically the militia engineers in the 1850s had put up. And the county surveyor wanted to know on what terms it had been erected. Could they demolish it? Was it allowed to be demolished? He then had a sidetrack and he said, actually, there are two small windows on the wall at numbers 1 and 2 Barbican Road, which have been opened up by the ex-county inspector, Mr. Elliott, and are these permitted? So this is just total idiocy, really. They've knocked down this building partly, and they shouldn't have done, even though the county council workers did it. And then he's complaining about two small windows in the back wall, which weren't there on the original plans. So, yeah, we do get tasked with this sometimes. Dot the I's, cross the T's. Have you heard of the Margarine Act 1887? In 1892, the local government board wrote to county councils requesting details of margarine manufacturers in the respective counties. So county clerk wrote back nil in both columns. He sent it back, but he kept copies of it, of that as well. So we have that. The only thing we've got on the Margarine Act 1887. And then finally, well, not finally, there's two more actually. This is the Lord Giveth, just cross out Lord Council Giveth with one hand and the other. So Mr. J.M. Pegler, the county rat catcher, must have been very, very pleased when the clerk of the council wrote to him in August 1947 to tell him that his post had been placed into the National Scheme of Conditions and Service. Fantastic. It resulted in a pay increase from £215 per annum plus a rat bonus to £255 per annum plus a rat bonus and a cost of living bonus. Excellent. You must have thought, excellent, go and buy that new car, we're going to be fine now. A month later, the council told him his employment's going to be terminated. He's going to be replaced with one of a number of trained operators. So, they giveth with the one hand, taketh away with the other, bless them. And then coming up to the wonderful slide, one of the biggest gripes about our roads today are the potholes, don't they? We know about them, they're there, what can we do about them? But I can secretly reveal that County Council experimented with making potholes, or scarifying as they called it, back in 1894 with this entry in the committee. And if you can't read that, it says, the county surveyor was empowered to hire a road scarifier from the road breaking company, brackets, Voysey and Horrocks, patents, brackets, limited, and to break up a few miles of road as an experiment. Are they still doing that today? I think they might be. And that brings us to the end of the talk. I hope you enjoyed it. So our next event here at the Heritage Herb on Saturday the 6th is basically a corporate memory, 135 years of local government. Again, we're going to have a couple of great speakers. Chaz Townley is going to be talking on the subject of public servants, all a selection of officers and councillors, showing 335 years of change in the Gloucestershire local government. And Karen Davison, a senior archivist here, she's going to be giving great intentions, the sort of history of the education service in Gloucestershire. We also have a great new attraction. This is our new feature. It's the Big Drawers, our cabinet of curiosities. So this is 20 little mini dioramas of county council functions. You've got to open them up and see if you can guess the function. And before you ask, we didn't spend any time on this, which is all done in our own free time to making these. I challenge you to find my two. You'll notice them. In addition, as usual, we'll have a great selection of documents from parish, county, district councils, free refreshments in the afternoon. And also, was your ancestor employed by the county council? The family history will be on site here as well to answer any questions you have. And I just draw attention to our next Secrets Revealed online talk on the 24th of April. It's going to be linked to our Green Pledge project, and it's entitled The Nugget of Purest Green. And it's going to be a look at the many and varied environmental records of the county. And on that note, I'll hand back to Gemma. Thanks very much, folks.
Thank you so much, John. That obviously took such a lot of research. We really do appreciate it. We've got a few different comments and questions. First of all, we have Sue, who mentions that her grandfather was providing pellets for someone to shoot a rabbit to feed his 5 kids during the war, which I can't imagine that went very far. Charlie has made a few comments as we've been kind of going along. Charlie, did you want to expand on any of these or add anything to them?
I don't know. Obviously, I was brought up when there were pound, shillings and pences, so I was able to easily translate 10 old pence into just under 4 new pence. Yeah. Yeah, and quarter session. I've obviously been doing quite a lot of work to do with highways by looking at quarter sessions records, and that's how a lot of my comments have come about. For instance, the poor rates were being paid by the quarter sessions for Shire Hall to the 2 parishes, the old parishes it covered, as an example of tax being paid by the quarter sessions.
Yeah.
And of course, until 1930, the county council was only looking after main roads. That's what we now call classified roads in the main, shall we say. District roads or unclassified roads were being maintained by the various urban and rural district councils. The urban district councils actually maintained the responsibility of looking after their local roads until 1974-75. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a geek on these. Railway bridges, we're talking about overbridges where roads go over railway bridges, go over railways. Their Network Rail is still responsible for them and their approaches as well. There is a bit of an issue unless specifically legislated for disused railway bridges where they go over a disused railway can sometimes be a bit of a problem.
Yes,
I'm aware of one or two there. And also I referred to steam radio, which is a valve supplied electronics instead of solid state ones, which are actually, although they are affected immediately by an electronic blast from an atom bomb, are not affected permanently. They normally recover. And in fact, when I worked in the army on the Chieftain main battle tank, the gun kit was all valve radio amplifiers for that reason.
Yeah. All right.
Any questions? I'd be delighted to answer.
Refer everybody to Charlie for those. Thanks, Charlie. Much interesting. Yeah, I know about the rail bridges. You know, the over bridges are always, you can see them on the little red plaques, gives you the information of the bridge itself, sort of thing. But yeah, I'd say time precluded looking at all this stuff. But yeah, thanks very much for that. I didn't know about the valves. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Charlie. That's really interesting, and I can see, I think you answered Anthony's question as well, which is great. So I won't read that one out as long as I've understood that. Alison just said to say she had to go, but thank you very much. Emma asked why would they want to have experimented with breaking up the roads, which was something I was wondering too.
I think it was probably a way of trying to resurface them. That's what I would think. Charlie, you've got a hand up there. What's the?
Yeah, my opinion is that they're almost certainly looking at scarifiering is still going on today.
Yeah,
effectively they take off the top surface and then remake it. Well, they were doing the same with their rollers back then in the 19th century and later. And in fact, tarmac was not actually rolled out in this area until the mid 1920s. Following the Great War, when there was an experiment carried out in 1919 by the brand new Minister of Transport to find out which road surface, impervious road surface, was most effective. And they actually settled on the proprietary tarmac, which is how we have it today. And I assure you that tarmac is completely different from asphalt.
Yes.
Asphalt is very slippery because of where it comes from. I could go into excruciating detail about that if you wish. But the very first record I have of a tarmac rural road was in Herefordshire. In 1923, the county surveyor in Herefordshire was given permission to tarmac the road between Hereford and Abergavenny, and reported back 18 months later that it cost twice as much, but was going to last more than 3 times as long. An example of the sort of strange stuff I have in my head.
Brilliant. But yeah, no, with the Scarify, we still see it today. It's where you go on a road, all of a sudden there's that sort of zigzaggy surface, which if you're on a motorbike or a push bike is an absolute nightmare. So that's what I mean by Scarify. But I couldn't resist the pothole angle.
Thank you ever such a lot, both. And just a couple of final comments. Just Carl said to say thank you again, always very fascinating, and Emma as well. And just to say that Katie's popped up the link to the Heritage Hub's upcoming events that John mentioned as well. So I think I've managed to get everybody's comments. I do hope so, and questions. Can we just say a big thank you to John again for such a brilliant presentation, and thank you all to all of you for coming along, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Cheerio. See you next time.